All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. This is Taylor Shanklin with KimVia. I'm really excited that we are welcoming back to this webinar stage Darian Rodriguez Heyman to talk today about his top 7 fundraising tips. So, Darian, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, and thank you all for tuning in today. I'm really excited to be with you and get a chance to share a couple of different tips and tools that I've discovered to be most effective and most efficient at helping nonprofits raise money. So we'll dive into that in just a second. Before we do, I wanted to give my friends at KimVia a chance to briefly kind of introduce themselves and the platform if you're not already familiar with it.
Awesome. Thanks, Darian. And yeah, this is Taylor. So for those of you who are new to KimVia, we provide online fundraising software that's really focused on being fast and easy for the donor to use because we want to help you drive more engagement and ultimately more revenue, more donations. So we have a very robust product that does everything from just general everyday giving donation forms on your website to peer-to-peer, do-it-yourself campaigns, or peer-to-peer fundraising events like runs, walks, and rides. And then we also do a lot of online giving days. So those are time-based crowdfunding giving day events that tend to be about 24 to 48 hours. So if you guys are interested in talking to us more about what we do and how we could help your organization do more in online fundraising, please reach out. You can just email me directly, taylor@kimvia.com, and I'll be sharing that at the end of the webinar as well. Also, feel free to chat in a question at any time. While Darian is presenting, myself and my colleague Kelly will both be manning the questions box. So if you have a question, we will be taking those. And if there's any questions that you have for Darian, we'll be able to ask those of him. So with no further ado, let's get into it.
Great, and thanks again, Taylor and Kelly, for hosting today's program, and to my friends at KimVia. I do just want to quickly underscore that unlike most webinar presenters or just presenters in general, I don't need you to wait until the very end of the talk to ask any questions you may have. So please, if as I'm going through the presentation, if anything isn't crystal clear, or if you have any questions about how it relates to you and to your organization, feel free to use the questions or the chat function, and I'll do my best to integrate answers to those throughout the program. So let's dive into it and let's talk about fundraising. First off, I did want to very quickly introduce myself here, and it looks like somewhere. Oh, okay. Just a really brief overview of my background. I've been working in social impact for over 20 years now, and I really got my start in this space as the executive director of Craigslist Foundation. And that was also where I basically discovered my life's work, which is helping people help, working with people just like yourselves, leaders of nonprofits, fundraisers, CEOs of mission-led businesses, and helping to connect them to the resources, the best practices, and the connections that they need to maximize impact. So that's the work I've been doing. I do it through executive coaching. I do it through consulting. I do it through a lot of public speaking. I'm also a part-time executive director myself again. I run New Me Foundation, the philanthropic arm of the largest organic tea company, where I help provide clean drinking water to our farming communities around the world. So I'm also a practitioner, not just a lecturer. And then the final way that I kind of help people help is through my books. And I've written a couple best-selling books, Nonprofit Management 101, and then more recently, Nonprofit Fundraising 101. Both of them are very practical and incredibly comprehensive and thorough, but they're broken out into really small and easy to understand chapters. Within 20 or 30 minutes, you can read a chapter on crowdfunding or on major donors or on direct mail or whatever the case may be. The first book, Nonprofit Management, really covers the spectrum of not only fundraising, but operations issues, board and volunteers, marketing, technology, etc. Whereas the newer book focuses more on the sections are individual donors, foundation grants, corporate giving, online giving, earned income, etc., with chapters in each section. And what I wanted to do for today's program is basically lift some of the most salient and practical and easy to implement tips out of both of these books and share them with you in hopefully a very simple step-by-step format. And both of the books are available on Amazon if those are of interest. So let's dive into it, and let's get into the meat and potatoes of today's presentation. What I prepared are really 7 specific tips, and the idea here is to sort of offer a grab bag of, not just individual donors, not just online, not just foundations, but really to look across the spectrum for some tips on each of those. And the first thing I wanted to start with is getting your board to fundraise and engaging them in contributing financially, as well as helping to support the fundraising effort. And this is something that's really important because as far back, about 10 years ago, a group called Compass Point released a study sharing that fully 50% of nonprofit executive directors leave not only their job, but the sector within 5 years. And the number one reason why they do that is frustrations around fundraising and all the responsibility, quickly followed by frustrations with their board. And when you put the two of those together and you look at this issue of getting your board to fundraise and contribute, this can be incredibly vexing for a lot of organizations, especially the smaller and mid-sized groups. And what I've seen over the years in my career are a couple specific tools. In fact, I'll be heading to a board meeting later today to implement these because I've seen the transformative impact that they very consistently make on organizations that implement them. And the 2 tools, and I do have free templates of these that I'm happy to email out to anybody who wants to contact me. You've got my Twitter handle on the upper right here. I'll also share my personal email and mobile phone at the end of the presentation. But the point is that these 2 tools are really simple templates. So I can email them out later, and I'm going to share them at least by screen now. Let me just quickly articulate the purpose of both of these tools, because it's always important to know what a tool is designed for. A board matrix is a really simple tool for essentially taking inventory, taking stock of what are we looking for on our board, what kind of characteristics, and out of all of the characteristics that we need to really fulfill our potential, what do we have now and what are we missing, right? The end result of implementing a board matrix is that instead of, the next time you have lunch with a very well-connected person and you talk a little bit about your organization's work, and at the end of the conversation, you say, hey, we're trying to expand our board. Do you know anybody that would be a good candidate? Maybe they mention somebody, maybe they don't. As opposed to, do you know any Latina lawyers with good foundation relationships that share our passion for animal welfare and might want to join our board, right? The likelihood of somebody giving you a candidate and a targeted candidate that's exactly what you're looking for goes up exponentially. So that's the goal of the board matrix. We'll dive into that in a sec. And then the board member agreement is a phenomenal tool. It's just a really simple contract, an agreement that the board chair and each and every one of your board members sign. And what it does is it articulates what are the responsibilities associated with being a board member. So it creates accountability and clarity of purpose. Let's look at each of these and talk a little bit more. Now, the first tool, as I mentioned, is the board matrix. This is actually a slightly outdated version of it because as I've thought of this more over time, essentially what you want to do is have a brainstorming conversation with your board. This should be a board-led activity, and really think about, 10 years from now, our organization has fulfilled its mission, it's fulfilled its potential. What does our board look like in that scenario? What is the ideal board that we want to build? And thinking of it in 3 different buckets. What is the expertise and capacity that we need on the board? We want a lawyer, we want an accountant, we want someone who knows how to fundraise, we want someone who has the personal capacity of writing a large check, whatever the case may be. What are the connections that the board offers us access to? We want connections to the media, to celebrities, to foundations and corporate leaders, et cetera. And then finally, what is the diversity that we're looking for on our board? We want a board that should ideally represent the community we serve. So if we're a youth services organization, let's make room for a board member under 30. Let's make sure that we're gender balanced, that we have LGBT representation, that we have someone in New York as well as San Francisco, or whatever it is for you. But the point is, what does a well-balanced and diverse board look like for you? And so as you think about these three buckets, the expertise and capacity, the connections and the diversity, the board comes up with a variety of different characteristics in each of those buckets. And then those are what are going on the rows on the left here. And then on the top, you've got your current board members, and maybe you even throw in one or two prospects there. But the point is, at your next board meeting, once you've identified all the characteristics, you just hand out a blank version of this, and everybody just kind of checks the boxes under their name that are relevant. I'm Latino. I am a fundraiser. I have good foundation relationships and based in California, whatever the case may be. Check, check, check. And within 5 minutes, what you're able to do very easily is say, hey, we don't have any women on the board. We don't have anybody who can write a 6-figure check every year or who has relationships with major donors. And actually, we only have one person who has foundation connections, but we've identified that as a really core part of our strategy moving forward. And so therefore, the output of this exercise is, what are the 3 or the 4 characteristics that you need on the board that you don't have right now, or at least that you don't have enough of? And there should be absolute clarity across the entire board and the staff of what is the profile of the kinds of board members you're looking for. And maybe you find the prospect who's got 1 or 2 of them. Maybe you find someone who's got all 3 or 4, and then you really appreciate them for what they're worth. Really, really great tool. Now, the board member agreement, and again, I'm happy to email these 2 templates out, including the updated version in the matrix if anybody wants. But the board member agreement is a very simple contract. It is limited to no more than 2 pages. It's 1 to 2 pages. It's written in very plain language, and it's basically a checklist. As a board member of this organization, I agree to blank, right? Or rather, colon, I agree to the following. And the idea here is you want language that is black or white. You don't want anything that's sort of subjective. So it's not the case that you should be saying, I agree to make a good faith effort to attend all board meetings. No, that's pretty much useless because, hey, maybe I went to 1 board meeting this year and I thought that was pretty good, but you basically think I'm dead weight. Who's right? Nobody, because there's no objective criteria. So that's why this agreement should say something like, I will attend 75% of all board meetings. I will serve on a committee. I will, volunteer at least 3 hours a month in terms of my time. I will make 1 site visit a year, et cetera. And then as far as the fundraising piece in particular, this tends to be the sort of pill that's buried in the cheese when you're trying to get the dog to take its medicine. This tool is really helpful to get the board to transition into embracing fundraising. There's usually 2 items in this document, and there are in the template that I can share that I include. One is around the personal contribution requirement. And the idea here is, first of all, I should say I'm not a fan of a give-get target because I think that lets people off the hook. Even if you get your company to donate or somebody else, that does not excuse you from contributing. Right? Now, at the same time, I'm also a very big fan of diverse boards. And rather than just having one mandatory minimum that everyone on the board gives at least $1,000 a year or what have you, well, that might be really low for the lawyer on your board who's a billionaire and could write a 7-figure check, and you're letting them off easy, as opposed to the student on your board who could never afford to donate $1,000 a year. Right? So the idea is, what I personally prefer is the requirement being that every board member make what is called a personal capacity gift. And this is defined in a template that I could share as the largest gift you can comfortably make and one of your top 3 philanthropic investments of the year. Right? If you're donating more money to 3 other nonprofits, go join their board. And so the idea is you should stretch, and that's sort of subjectively and personally defined. But everybody has to give, even if you just give $20 this year because you just had a kid or you just lost your job, that's okay. But 100% board participation is critical because in general, the way that you're framing this document, and again, it should be board-led, but you're convincing the board of the purpose of this document and then empowering them to actually work through the specifics of what the requirements are. But the idea is, as we enter this next stage of our development and really look to take our efforts to the next level, and in particular, start expanding our efforts to secure institutional funding from groups like foundations, one of the questions that this webinar leader told me that we're going to get asked all the time is, what is your board participation in fundraising? Meaning, what percentage of your board contributes? And the right answer, it's not that complicated, the right answer is 100%. The wrong answer is anything less than that, right? If you're not contributing, why should they? And so the idea is it's really, really critical that everybody must contribute at some level. The other clause I would add in here is that I will facilitate introductions to, pick a number, 5 potential donors and funders every year. Right? The idea being everybody's expected to open up the Rolodex. It's not the case that every board member should be expected to make asks of their community and go out and pitch and raise money directly, but everybody must be part of the fundraising process, opening up doors and facilitating introductions to individual donors, foundations, corporate leaders, etc. And it could be the company they work for, it could be one that they're connected to, whatever the case may be, but everybody's part of the fundraising team. So I mentioned the idea of going after institutional funding, and let's talk a little bit more about that, because in particular, as I've worked with thousands of nonprofits all over the world and all over the country, what I've seen pretty consistently is that basically foundation grants get a bad rap. And the reason why I find is quite consistent. What I've discovered as I've talked about foundation fundraising all over the country and the world is that a lot of nonprofits have been through a very similar traumatic experience, basically, where they've invested a huge amount of time and energy into identifying foundation prospects, and then they've put together, the most amazing grant proposals that they put 5-10 hours a piece into, and they sent them out through the respective foundation websites, and they didn't get anything back, or they got one small grant back, and it, just the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. Well, what I would say in that instance is the reason why those groups have been burned and are not interested in raising money from foundations, and that they believe it's not worth their time, is because they're not doing it right. Right? They're not doing it right. And what I mean by that is that in general, if you just send a grant application out to any randomly selected foundation, maybe if you're lucky, you've got a 1% chance of succeeding, even if it's a really well-written proposal, because you're not taking the time to target who you're sending it to. But here's the point. Even if you do, like in the example I mentioned here, even if you do put a lot of time and energy into doing prospect research and identifying the most targeted foundation prospects possible, and then you send in a very well-written, customized proposal through their website or through whatever standard channels they offer, even in that instance, your success rate is only about 5%. So we're still not much better off than buying a lottery ticket. And the good news is I'm going to share a very simple formula and kind of step-by-step process to get from 1% or 5% all the way up to 50%, meaning that half of the grants that I write are actually approved. And that is because, I follow a cardinal rule. I follow a golden rule when it comes to foundation fundraising, which is never submit a cold grant. Meaning, don't show up to a party you haven't been invited to. I never submit a grant I have not been invited to submit. And that may cut off some opportunities with groups that, don't want to be solicited and things like that. But what I found is it's a much more efficient use of my time. Yes, most certainly to use prospect research tools to identify the most targeted prospects, but then rather than spending the time to put together a proposal, I'd rather spend the time getting a call or a meeting so that I can talk to them and figure out exactly, is this a fit? And in particular, which pieces of our work are a fit? A lot of different specific questions that we're going to jump into now, at least the top 5 that are most critical. The one thing I do want to say quickly is the good news is from a prospect research standpoint, there's really only 2 names you need to know. And from a foundation standpoint, foundationcenter.org is really the only resource you need. If you're in one of the 5 cities where they have a physical branch, I highly encourage you to go in there in person. You can also go to foundationcenter.org, but then you're using the basic version of the world's most comprehensive database of foundation funders. But there's a basic version and there's a premium version, and you have to pay to use that if you do it online. But if you go into one of their offices, or they've got about 500 affiliates, of all the libraries and community centers out there have a license for the most part, then you can use the premium version. But if you go into one of those 5 major cities, they actually have paid librarians that are on staff that know the database inside and out and will help you look through it. They're really, really helpful. The one here in San Francisco is phenomenal, as well as the one in Atlanta, New York, Cleveland, and DC. So, but the point is, never show up to a party you haven't been invited to, right? Never apply for a grant you haven't been invited to. And Foundation Center is the resource that you need to find who your top 10 or 20 or 30 prospects should be. If you're going after government grants, grants.gov is the only resource you need there. But let's say you identify a foundation as a top 5, top 10 prospect, and then you just so happen to meet someone in the hallway at a conference from that foundation who is the program officer, the person in charge of giving away money in the program area where you're working in homelessness, right? Well, if you get to give them your 10 or 20-second elevator pitch, and they say, that sounds great, send me a proposal, then that's wonderful. That is a step in the right direction, and we are definitely better off than 5%, but we're not at 50% yet. And again, to use the analogy of the party, if I invite you to a party, that's step 1 versus you crashing it, but you need to know what's the address, what time should you be there, what's the dress code, do I need to bring anything, all kinds of those details. And there are about 3 or 4 main details that are really critical to get from 5% to 50%. And it starts with getting invited to apply. That's the overarching umbrella. But there's a couple additional pieces of information that I would encourage you to get, so that in this instance, if you did bump into that person in the hallway and they did say, get me a proposal, instead of saying, of course, I'd be happy to, thanks for the opportunity, I would say, I'd be happy to, but before I do that, could you spare 10 or 15 minutes for a quick call or a meeting, since I have a couple questions I want to talk through before we send in the proposal, right? That would be my approach and my response. And in that conversation, what I would be looking to do, is, yes, again, secure the invitation to apply, but let's get a little bit more specific about the party that we're planning to attend. And the first thing that I would be looking to identify is the what and the why, the programs and the positioning. And this is what I call the pasta test. If you remember, guys, when you were in college and learning how to cook, you would throw the spaghetti at the wall to see when it sticks, and that's when you know it's done, right? And this is kind of what you're doing with a series of elevator pitches. The idea being you should have a 30 to 45 second elevator pitch for each of what I would call your fundables. And by fundables, I mean, first and foremost, general operating support and your organization as a whole. You should absolutely have a really solid elevator pitch for that. But then Each of your programs and initiatives should also have their own elevator pitch. And finally, if there are 2 or 3 big ideas that you're not doing today, but ideally you've discussed them with the board, they're directly in line with your mission, and bottom line, if someone wrote a big enough check, you'd love to launch these initiatives. Those are also fundables. Basically, everything you have to sell, everything you have to talk about, right? And so the idea is maybe you've got 6 or 7 fundables, but you're not necessarily going to use every one of those in every conversation. Based on your research, based on your understanding of this organization's interests and goals, maybe you're only going to share 3 of them. And you generally are going to start with general operating support, but maybe you're going to
Hey guys, this is Taylor from the team at KimVia. We lost audio and are working on getting it back up if you can hear me.
hello again.
Oh, hey, there
Not
you
sure what
are.
happened there.
Hey, can you
Hey
hear
guys,
me? I
sorry
can hear
about
you
that.
now.
I sure can.
Okay, cool. We're back.
Okay, let's get back into it, and I really apologize about that. So in any case, what I was saying is that you have these different elevator pitches based on your research and your understanding of their goals. You're not going to use all of them. But in the beginning of your conversation, yes, you're going to start out with small talk and build the relationship. Then you're going to move into a process called appreciative inquiry, and I'll talk about that in just a second as we look at individual donor solicitation. But ultimately, once you have the context of their goals and how they think about their philanthropy, you're going to dive into your pitch. And that pitch should be customized based on their interests. But ultimately, rather than diving into a 30-minute pitch, make it a conversation and start out with these elevator pitches so that within 2 or 3 minutes, you've thrown, several pieces of pasta against the wall. And now what you're looking for is you're looking for resonance. You're looking for, and ideally they're just going to volunteer this. And after you finish your 3 or 4 pitches, they're going to respond and say, well, gosh, I really love what you guys are doing as a whole. And we clearly share a focus on working with the most vulnerable populations in our society. And in particular, I think your vocational training program is especially on target for us because of our shared focus on helping people help themselves, right? Or something like that. And again, maybe they don't just volunteer that. Maybe you finish your 3 or 4 pitches and, you kind of put out the jazz hands and there's crickets for a minute. And you may have to ask, well, based on our research, it really looks like each of these initiatives and programs fit strongly with your, with your funding priorities. What do you think? Question mark, pause, and then you put the ball in their court, right? So you may have to ask them what they think, but the point is, ideally, there's going to be some kind of resonance. You're looking for a tuning fork effect, and as I said, you're listening for the what and the why. You're listening for what specific fundables, what programs and initiatives are they interested in funding. And almost just as importantly, you're listening for the language around why those are appropriate. Because here's the deal, in my experience, oftentimes the language they use to articulate why each of these things is a fit is language that they use internally to govern their grant making, but not something you're going to find on their website or in their annual report. So in your notes, you are writing down, okay, they're interested in providing general operating support because of our shared focus on working with the most vulnerable populations in our community, and they're interested in the vocational training program because of our shared focus on helping people help themselves, right? And you want those words written down in your notes, because guess what? You want them in your proposal as well. So now we figured out what they want to fund and why they want to fund it. The next thing that we want to ask is, how much funding should we be asking for? And we need to repeat this question for each of the different fundables that they've expressed an interest in, right? And so the idea is, after they say, the what and the why, my next question would be, well, that's so wonderful. We're really excited to hear about your interest in supporting the organization as a whole, and in particular, our vocational training program. Let me ask, as far as general operating support, which would be incredibly helpful, our budget next year is $1 million. And I'm wondering, do you think a $250,000 request would be reasonable, or would $125K be more realistic, given that we're a first-time grantee? Question mark, pause, right? And the idea is that you're giving them a range. In general, based on your research, you want the bottom number of your range to be about 20-25% above the high end of their range, right? So if they give out, let's say, $50,000 to $100,000 grants, then I would ask for something like between 175, 150, and 125 on the low end of the range. Because, and the reason why you're sort of intentionally overshooting it by a respectable margin, not blowing them out of the water and making it clear you haven't done any homework, but you're overshooting it by 20% or so, is that you want them to come back to you and say, well, gosh, even 125 would probably be too rich for us. I would say, we normally give out at the 50K range, but 100 would be on the high end of what we could consider, right? Great. In your notes, you're writing down 100,000. If they give you a range, all that matters is the number on the high end of that range, because that's what you're asking for. And ultimately, this conversation is designed to help you make the largest size ask possible, right? That's why we're giving them a range. That's why we're overshooting by a little bit. And then hopefully they're going to respond back. And if they give us a range, all that matters is the number on the high end of that. And then we're going to have to repeat that same conversation for each of the other fundables. So in this case, they also expressed an interest in the vocational training program. Oh, well, and that's wonderful. Happy to get you a proposal for that. And thanks also for your interest in our vocational training program. Our budget for that program next year is $80,000. Do you think that the foundation would be in a position to write the entire program, or would a request for $40,000 be more reasonable? Question mark, pause, right? And the idea here is, again, based on your research, you want to overshoot it a little bit. If the program has a budget that's within the range of what they fund, or if in general through your research you were not able to identify what size grants they typically make, I would invite them to fund 100% of next year's budget for an individual program or initiative, with a fallback of half of that. And if you're talking about your organization as a whole, because no one's going to want to fund the whole thing, I would invite them to fund a quarter of next year's budget with a fallback of half of that. Now, again, that's just in the instance where your research did not tell you what size grants they typically give, or the grants they give are so large that you can go ahead and ask for that number on the kind of high end of entire program budget or a quarter of your overall budget. So now we've repeated this request of the dollar amount conversation around each of the fundables that have stuck. And then the final question, the final thing that you're going to want to ask about, and this is what I call the Jedi mind trick, because it's a little counterintuitive, but it works so incredibly well. I actually spoke alongside a program officer, a grant-making decision maker at a foundation, who was incredibly busy, right? She got 800 requests for 30 grants that she was able to give out every year. But what was amazing is, of the 30 she gave out, 20 of them did this Jedi mind trick. And it sounds kind of funny, but it works. Basically, at the end of the conversation, what you're going to say is, thank you so much for your interest in providing general operating support, and helping to support our vocational training program. Happy to get you a proposal for both for those. One last question. Would you mind reviewing a draft of our proposal before we formally submit it? Would you mind reviewing a draft of our proposal before we formally submit it? And the point here is that, first off, you should know, in my experience, they almost always say yes. I've only had one person ever say no to that request, but they almost never actually do it, right? So you should assume that the draft you send in is a final draft, and it might affect the deadline. If there's a March 1st deadline on the website, maybe you need to offer to get it into them a couple weeks early so that they can at least theoretically look at the draft. But again, you should expect that they're not going to do that, but that's okay. If they do take the time to provide some edits or some feedback, even better. But ultimately, what you're looking for here is not necessarily those edits, but rather you want that program officer to essentially adopt your proposal. You want them to become your champion, your advocate. Because I can tell you, having been in the room on the board of a small foundation when these conversations were happening and when we had a docket of 10 different grant requests that that we've received, and maybe we only get to give 4 or 5 of them right out, how do we decide? Well, ultimately, there's usually only 1 or 2 or 3 of those proposals that have a champion in the room. One of the board members, one of the staff who says, I really think we should fund this one because blank, 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 right? And the point is, nobody really wants to undercut that person. And so the requests with a champion almost always get funded, and they almost always get funded for the full amount. And it's the other ones that don't have an advocate that wind up on the editing room floor. And for whatever reason, I can't quite explain it, but I just know that it works. When you ask them to review a draft of your proposal, even if they don't do it, which is what usually happens, somehow emotionally and mentally something clicks, and all of a sudden they have a sense of ownership over your proposal, and it just works. And so ultimately, to take a step back before we move forward and look at the big picture, the difference between 5% and a 50% success rate with foundation fundraising, 5% is you spend some time on Foundation Center, grants.gov, you put together the best, most targeted proposal ever, and you send it in and you cross your fingers and pray, as opposed to you spend that same time and energy on Foundation Center, you identify your prospects, but then you spend some time and energy getting a call or a meeting within which you get invited to apply for funding. Not only do you get a blanket invitation, but you are invited to apply for specific programs and initiatives with a rationale behind why each of them is a fit for their funding priorities. You also get a specific dollar amount that you should apply for each of those initiatives. And that program officer, that decision maker, agrees to review a draft of your proposal before it's formally submitted. That's the difference between 5% and 50%. And so I hope that's helpful. Now let's move into it. And as I mentioned a second ago, I wanted to talk about individual donors. This is really where the lion's share of funding for nonprofits in this country comes from. And I don't know if you recognize this gentleman in the middle here with the light colored suit, but his name is Hank Rosso. And he was essentially the godfather of professional fundraising. He really helped to create the Fundraising Institute at Indiana University, Association of Fundraising Professionals. He was an author and really just a luminary that helped establish fundraising as a profession. And one of the things, if not the thing that he's probably most famous for saying, is that the number one reason why people don't give is because they're not asked. Because they're not asked. And so making an ask is a really critical part of fundraising. It is not the only part. So in particular, as we reflect back on engaging our board in fundraising, one of the things that can be really challenging is oftentimes board members don't want to ask, right? And that has to be okay. But ultimately, thinking that fundraising is only about the ask is like thinking about dating is only about the proposal for marriage. It is a point of culmination, but it is not the end all be all, right? There's the stewardship that goes into it. There's the cultivation as well. That's sort of before and after, right? But as it relates to the ask and actually making the pitch, the very simple process that I want to outline is the first step. You have a meeting with the donor, you've been building up a relationship, and this is also pretty similar for the foundation conversations we just talked about. But after you're done with a little bit of small talk in the beginning of your meeting, the first thing you're really looking to do is what's known as appreciative inquiry. And I encourage you to Google this term and do a little bit of reading on it. There's a lot of great content out there on appreciative inquiry. But the basic premise as it applies to fundraising is you want to get inside that prospect's head, right? And the idea is, based on your research, you may have a sort of overarching sense of their giving, of their areas of interest, etc. But appreciative inquiry is really about understanding what motivates their giving. And the way I like to think of it is, your goal here is to really ask level 2 questions. And these questions should demonstrate that you've done some homework and that you have a sense of, hey, I see that you've been supporting homelessness in the San Francisco Bay Area for the last 30 years. I'm really curious, what is it that connected you to that issue, right? Oftentimes, especially for major donors, there's kind of some emotional experience that they had, whether it was in their youth or growing up, that really connected them to this issue, right? Whether it's the arts or education or homelessness or whatever it might be. And you want to understand that history and that context. And this is similarly just as true for a foundation where, hey, I know your foundation has been supporting this issue. What is it that originally connected you to it, or whatever the case may be, right? And so the point is, the goal of appreciative inquiry is really understanding what motivates his or her or their giving. Once you have that context, that's when you move into those elevator pitches I talked about before. And just in general, you start talking about your work, not in a way where you just jump on a monologue and get on your soapbox for 30 minutes, but similar to the foundations, you want to make it a conversation. And you want to start from the top of the pyramid and work your way down as opposed to the bottom up. You don't want to start with all the details of your work. You want to start with the big picture. Why does your organization exist? What is the problem you're trying to solve? What is your ultimate solution? And then, and in broad strokes, what are you doing about it, right? And hopefully they're going to ask questions and draw you further down into the pyramid that is your message. But the point is that you are really looking to have a conversation, understand what motivates their giving, and then talk about your work in as contextualized a way as possible, so that hopefully you're getting that resonance, you're getting that tuning fork effect like we talked about with foundations. And once you've really sort of narrowed in on what is it that this donor really cares about, out of all the different pieces of our work, similar to the pasta test, what are the one or the two things that really stand out for them? I met with a donor yesterday and was originally talking to her about the clean water work of NUMMI Foundation, but it turned out she was an artist and was really passionate about education. And we also have a curriculum program, including an arts curriculum at NUMMI Foundation. And so I wound up pivoting and talking about that and was able to make an ask. And when I talk about an ask, there's sort of a few things I want to say here, because it should be direct and it should be specific. What I mean by that is something like, I'd like to invite you to join me in supporting the good work of this organization and supporting our arts curriculum program. And I'm wondering, could you consider a gift of $20,000 today? Because if you could, that would enable us to hire a part-time program manager and expand our efforts from 30 schools into 100 and reach, 1,000 more children. Is that something you could consider today? Question mark, pause, right? And there's a few different pieces in there. Let me just focus on 4 things in particular. Number one, if you recall, I started out by saying, I invite you to join me in supporting this work, right? And that is a peer ask. Rather than saying, I want you to donate, I'm saying, I want you to do what I already did, right? So it's a peer ask. I'm asking you to do something I've done. Number two is there is a dollar amount included. It is a specific ask with a concrete dollar amount and also a sense of the impact that will be unlocked if they say yes to that dollar amount, right? We're going to reach 1,000 more children. We're going to hire this person, etc. And then finally, at the end of the ask, it is not an ask if it doesn't end in a question mark, right? If it ends in a period, I encourage you to consider making a donation today, period. Okay, as opposed to, could you consider a gift of $20,000 today? Question mark. And I would add pause, because after you make that question, they should be the next person to talk, even if it feels like an eternity. And I promise you, it's not any more than 5 or 10 seconds. They should absolutely be the next person to speak, right? So number, impact, question mark, pause, and then wait for their response. So that is really the framework for making an ask. Now, as we move into the final 15 minutes here, let me share a couple final tips. First of all, we've talked about raising money and making an ask in general, but especially in an online environment, one of the things that's going to be really critical to your success, and this is also true for fundraising events and even in-person meetings, is helping a prospect understand the incremental impact that their donation can make. So yes, you may be raising $1 million to fight child poverty, but what can my support of $1,000 do? This is what I call the Sally Struthers effect, where, for the price of a cup of coffee, this kid can stay in school for a year. But the more modern example I would point you toward is Heifer International. And just look at their donate page and see how they say for $500, this family's going to get a calf, and they'll have milk and leather and meat, etc. Right? Really helpful tool. So take a look at their language, and also note that they have a little disclaimer. They're saying, hey, these are just illustrations and examples. Ultimately, the money's going to general operating support, and we're just helping you understand the impact that your dollars can make. Because ultimately, as Kay Sprinkle Grace said when I interviewed her for the major donor chapter of my book, people don't give to you, they give through you, right? We are a channel, we are a conduit that connect people and organizations with resources to the change they want to see in the world. And in an online environment, what this looks like is typically what's known as a gift string or a donation string, where you have a series of different default donation levels with an impact associated with each. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, because it's one part of a 3-part experiment. What I want to encourage you to do as a little bit of homework after you leave today's program is a 3-part experiment that I promise you, if you do this, it will at least double your online fundraising results, usually triple or quadruple, and it usually doesn't take any more than 2 months. So, the idea here, the premise is, when I was interviewing my friends at Network for Good for the online fundraising chapter of the book, Network for Good, if you don't know, has raised over $1 billion for nonprofits through the internet, and it's kind of like a big shopping mall where they connect donors to almost any nonprofit they want. So they have a huge amount of volume, and they talked about an experiment in my book where they basically changed their donate button from gray to red, and boom, in one instant, their online donations went up by 30%. 30%, and that was just from going from gray to red. So the point is, listen, I don't know if red is your color or blue or green. I don't know if your donate button should be a circle or a square, or maybe you preserve mountain lions and it should be a mountain lion paw. I don't know what font it should be, etc. But the point is, I bet you that there is a right answer, one, and number two, it's probably not what you would have guessed. And the point when you're raising money online is that we have direct, complete, and immediate access to the data. And rather than embracing our gut, rather than embracing our intuition, let us embrace the data and let us look at the numbers. And so what I want to encourage you to do is a 3-part experiment. The first part is optimizing your donate button. So the idea is use a free tool like Google Analytics or something like Web Trends to look at one metric only, which is what percentage of people to your website, what percentage of your website traffic is clicking the donate button. And just as a starting point, as a benchmark, you should know 0.8% of all traffic to nonprofit websites become donors, right? Just under 1%. So ideally, you're getting something over 1% of the traffic to your site to click donate. But for a few days, try making your button red. And then for a few days, try making it green, and then blue, and then purple, and then circle, and then square, and then different fonts, etc. And give each different version a few days, and then look at the numbers and see which donate button got the best click-through rate. That's the donate button that you want to be using. Once we've done that first experiment, now we're going to the gift string that I mentioned before, the donation string with those different default donation levels. And a couple things you should know here, almost always your most popular donation level will be the second smallest level. In this instance on the right, it's the $100 level. Why? Because people don't like to feel cheap, and they usually skip over the very bottom level. So usually second from the bottom tends to be the most popular. Now with the second and in fact the third experiment, your goal is going to be to maximize a different metric, which is your average online gift. And again, as a starting point, industry average across all US nonprofits is $82. So just like with the foundation conversation where you want to overshoot that number by about 20-25% margin, so too do you want to take your average online gift, bump it up by about 20-25%, and that should be your second from the lowest level as a starting point. So as a generic starting point, the one I have here, 50, 100, 250, 500 other, is a great starting point if you're working in a vacuum and you have no access to historic data. But then you should experiment because everybody's mileage varies, and maybe you should try 5, 25, 50, 100 other, or 100, 250, 500, 1,000 other. You know, try going from high to low and low to high. And again, look at the data and see what gift string, what default donation levels maximize your average online gift. And then finally is what kind of impacts, back to that Sally Struthers effect, what kind of impact can you unlock with each of those donation levels? And this is where a brainstorm with your leadership can come in really handy. And once you figured out, okay, it's 50, 100, 250, 500 other, well, come up with 3 or 4 things you can do with $50, with $100, et cetera. And if you're not the kind of group that's serving soup to the homeless, where you could say, we could serve this many people meals or clean water or something really straightforward like that, think of it in terms of staff time. With $100, we can afford 5 hours of staff time so we can mentor 5 children. We can get 1 kid into college, whatever the case may be, right? So, you know, and then you experiment with that. And again, we're optimizing against our average online gift. Now, especially given the fact that we're hosted by KimVia today, let's talk briefly about online fundraising, because this is something that is increasingly a huge fundraising opportunity for nonprofits. Now, a couple things that I want to say. First of all, you should really be leading with, if not at least promoting and offering a monthly giving opportunity. If you look at the numbers, I mentioned earlier, the average online gift is $82. Well, the average monthly gift is $22, right? So within 4 months, you're going to be bringing in more money. It's also building a solid base of support for your organization, which is strategically important. And if you look at the donor loyalty rates, if someone gives you a one-time gift this year, they're only 35% likely to give again next year. As opposed to if they sign up as a monthly donor, they're 87% likely to give again next year. Basically, people are lazy, and anything that takes additional actions, whether that's, you know, resigning from your monthly donor campaign or making another donation next year, is unlikely to happen. So you might as well ask them to give monthly, and it feels, you know, easier to give $20 a month than it does to give $250 a year, or just as a one-time gift. So lead with monthly giving. Really, really important. And then keep the donor registration process as simple as possible. only ask the questions you absolutely need. Because if you look at the data, every field that you add into the donation registration process is going to decrease your conversion rate by 2%. That means if you want to ask their birthday or how they heard about you or whatever it might be, you just lost 6% of the people that have clicked donate and said, I want to support you, and basically you're getting in their way. And now I'm not here to endorse one platform over another. Of course, really grateful to KimVia for hosting today. But the point is, you're going to need an online fundraising platform to process your donations. One of the things I encourage you to look at that KimVia does offer is not only do they do donation processing on your website, but they can also help you launch a crowdfunding campaign and engage in peer-to-peer based fundraising. That's a separate webinar, but it does certainly represent a big opportunity. It's also really important you make sure that your platform does offer the monthly giving solution that I mentioned. And the other two criteria I would add, one is that it should integrate into your website so that it looks and feels like your site, as opposed to, somebody's on your site and they click donate and all of a sudden they're on PayPal and it looks and it feels differently. And that's like someone walking into your store, picking up a sweater, they want to go pay for it and you send them to a different store to buy it. It doesn't really work. You're going to lose a lot of people. And then the final thing, aside from needing to be mobile friendly, which most of the platforms do now, the final thing I want to quickly mention is that after somebody makes a gift through your website, through social media, what have you, but after someone processes their donation, on the thank you page, beyond just saying thanks for the support, have a nice day, it is absolutely critical that your platform offers the functionality where it says, thanks for giving, click here to share on Facebook or click here to share on Twitter. And then once somebody clicks, up pops a pre-populated message that says, I just donated to Numi Foundation. Join me in supporting their good work, providing clean water to farming communities around the globe. Right? The point is, just simply by adding that functionality, on average, you are going to more than double your online fundraising results. And you're going to do it by expanding your donor database with people that you didn't previously have access to. Right after somebody gives is the time they're most likely to tell their friends to follow their lead. So you want to make that as easy as possible. And then the final tip as we get ready to wrap up today is I want to encourage each and every one of you to know about probably the best kept secret in the nonprofit sector, which is Google Grants. And any nonprofit can go to google.com/grants and sign up for $10,000 a month of free advertising via Google, right? And you do need to spend a little bit of time with the application and getting your program up and running and then optimizing it every few months, but you're getting a $120,000 advertising budget, which is a phenomenal opportunity. And essentially, this is AdWords. So when people search for homeless shelters in Minnesota, you're going to pop up at the top as one of those promoted links. It's going to drive more traffic to your website. We talked about the fact that roughly 1% of visitors to your site are going to donate, hopefully more with some of the tips I shared today. And so Google Grants is a great way to drive more traffic to your site. You will be limited to the $10,000 a month of AdWords, and there is a limit on what you're able to bid per click. So you're going to have to come up with a series of more specific and targeted key phrases, but that means the traffic that goes to your site will be that much more targeted. And so with that, I really just want to thank each and every one of you for your time today. I want to thank you not only on behalf of myself and on behalf of our hosts at KimVia, but I want to thank you on behalf of the thousands of people that you collectively serve. I genuinely hope that you are leaving today's talk not only inspired, but inspired to action, and that you can take some of these tips, some of these tools, put them into practice immediately, and be more effective and more efficient at supporting and serving the cause you care so deeply about. If the free copy of the board member agreement or the board matrix template are of interest, please feel free to email me. I'm also very active on LinkedIn, and I love connecting people to potential funders and donors on that platform. And you've even got my personal mobile phone here. So I am very much at your disposal. Always happy to do pro bono work if it's a small request. And then, as I said, I also do professional coaching and consulting with a fundraising and board development focus. So I'm very much at the disposal of each and every one of you. I will reach out via LinkedIn. And again, I want to thank our host at KimVia for hosting today and each of you for making the time for today's program.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Darian. Thanks for joining us and speaking. And if any of you guys have questions, we can hang out for a couple of minutes. Please type questions into the questions box. If you guys are interested in speaking with us more about KimVia and your challenges in online fundraising and how we could potentially help you with those, we would love to talk to you. You can reach out to me personally at taylor@kimvia.com. And we would love to talk to you. So thank you again, Darian. It's always a pleasure to have you on as a guest. And we will send out the recording and the slides to this. That way, if you want to watch a rerun, you can, or if you want to pass it along with a colleague, you can do so.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Thank you so much. Bye.